Welcome to episode 38 of the Tax Professionals podcast, which is part of a mini three-part series providing guidance on how to pass the ATT and CTA exams. In this episode, BPP lecturer Nitin and I give you advice on how to approach and pass a CTA or ATT exam resit.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
I don't like to use the word fail when it comes to exams. It has unnecessary negative connotations, and if you found out that you didn't pass an exam, you probably already felt frustrated, upset, angry, demotivated, or something along those lines, and that's just perfectly normal. But just because you didn't pass the last time round, it doesn't mean that you won't pass the exam at all. You can still pass it, so as demotivating as it might be, don't give up. Use it as an opportunity to learn from. You may not be sure on where to start in preparing for a resit, or just might be looking for some extra guidance, and this episode is full of great tips to help you pick yourself up and smash your resit. Just as a heads up, it does involve some very honest and sometimes brutal advice from me and Nitin, but this is as we truly want to give you the best chances of passing your next exam. The episode covers the importance of self-reflection and being honest with yourself to figure out why you didn't pass last time. It covers how to do this and other advice on how to approach and pass a resit. It also covers advice on how to get the motivation you need to pass the resit. Just before we jump into the episode, I just want to mention that this is part of a three-part mini-series. The other two episodes are on how to pass the CTA Advanced Technical Papers and the Application and Professional Skills Papers. Both of these papers are tailored more to the Owner Managed Business or OMB papers, but they are still relevant and contain lots of useful information even if you're sitting a different one of the Advanced Technical or APS papers. The Advanced Technical one will be live on Monday the 26th of July and the APS one will be live on Monday the 2nd of August. There are also a bunch of other podcasts and resources available to help you pass the exams, and I've got a link to all of these episodes and resources in the show notes. You can access the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP30a. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP30a, and that just stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast episode 30a. You can also listen to episodes in most podcast apps of your choice, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Just type in the Tax Professionals Podcast into any of those apps and it should come up. In the episode, you will hear reference to making a revision folder or a summary, which is something that you can use and take into the exam whilst they're still open book. And Nitin and I have created a step-by-step guide on how to create your very own revision summary or folder. And it also contains some example contents pages and summaries too. And you can download a copy of this from a link that's in the show notes. Without further ado, let's get to it. Just to start then, this episode is all about how to pass an ATT or CT exam that you've previously failed, because it's inevitable that some students do fail their exams. They are not easy, but failing is almost necessary to the road to success. And Nitin is joining me today to help make sure that if you do have a resit, that you give yourself the best chances of passing it. I imagine you've already helped a lot of students in the past with resits, Nitin. What's it like helping people with resits?
It can be equally satisfying as well as frustrating, if I'm being perfectly honest. So let me elaborate. So I think the problem is when a student fails a CTA or ATT exam, the important thing is that the student then needs to, you get two types of students. The first one that acknowledges actually the plan I had in place or the way that I approached my studies wasn't effective. So they've immediately identified issues and problems. Okay, and so they're the ones you can quite easily help. The second type of student you have is the one that's kind of in self-denial, that I practiced every single question, I did everything I was supposed to do, and I still failed. And that's where it becomes difficult in trying to identify where the student went wrong, where they feel like they haven't, and that they just felt that the exam was too difficult, the examiner was harsh, And so, yeah, you've got two types of students. So, in some cases, as I said, it's fantastic. In others, it's a challenge to help them realize.
Do you ever think it's fair that people feel like they fall into that second category where they're in self-denial? Do you ever think that could be right and it was just a poor exam or something like that? Or do you just think there's no chance if you prepared properly that you'd be in this position?
I think the problem is, Jack, is there are certain students who, and I've seen this a lot over the last 22 years, where their approach to passing exams has been that if you complete every single past paper question, you will pass the exam. Something similar will come up. And that is true to a certain extent with other qualifications that I teach, that, there will be a certain element of repetition and you've got a really good chance of getting through. But with the ATT and CTA exams, it doesn't work like that. And that's the biggest barrier, is that I think students need to understand that, yes, you practice questions, but you've got to practice them with the right intention, not with the hope that it's going to come up again, but you've got to learn to be able to spot issues and scenarios and be diagnostic in your approach. And I think sometimes students forget that they're training to become tax advisors in the real world. Okay, and ATT and CTA is a direct link to that. It's the gateway. And so I sometimes think, whilst they're technically brilliant, I think they just lack these really simple skills of problem solving. And if they just started with that from day one in their studies, which is what I do, Libby does with OMB, I think all students will pass first time, and the pass will be a lot higher.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I do completely agree with that. So when students do fail an exam and they come to you and they might be feeling upset, frustrated, demotivated, etc., what is the first thing that you would say to them usually? What advice would you give them at that point?
I think when a student has instantly failed, okay, of course it's awful. Everyone's got a plan in life where they want to be, what they want to do. There's a time. We all have a timeline. Okay. And I think that I always believe there's a greater power out there. Whatever your faiths and beliefs are, there's a greater power out there. And I always say this to students: listen, if you failed that exam right now, you are being protected from being struck off for negligence. You are not ready to become a tax advisor. Yeah. And I think you've got to look at this as a positive, that there's still a little bit more to learn. There are quite a few more skills you need to kind of harness and, get to grips with. Okay. And see it as an opportunity. Okay. Failing isn't great, but it's also, it's not the end, and I think, some students want this instant qualification. I want to be CTA, but to be CTA, you've got to be good. You've got to be good. And I say to students, look, you need to kind of dust yourself down, take a week off, clear your mind, spend time with friends and family. And that's the first thing I encourage. I go, look, don't worry about this, and I'll say, look, come back to me in a week's time. Let's put a game plan together. And, the game plan isn't standard for every single student. The game plan will be different. Okay. Because during the conversation, Jack, I need to understand what went wrong. So to give you an example, Jack, some students will say to me, I failed because I didn't understand everything, which it does surprise me. And because I say to my students, if you don't get it, talk to me now. Don't tell me after the exam, tell me now. So I think some students weren't as proactive in class to really bridge those knowledge gaps. So we identify the knowledge gaps. That's one area. Another situation could be, Jack, that students took on more than one paper, and we've covered this already, and we're not going to have that debate today, but I think students sometimes they struggle to manage two papers or more and realize actually I should have just done one. And the third and final one is, it's life. Some things will happen where suddenly the student can't focus on the exam, and I've dealt with a lot of that over the last year and a half. And so it's really tailored, it's really working with the students. Some students have deferred, some students have changed the way they're studying. So it's really bringing that in. And also when you're a retaker, even if you've scored 20%, 30%, the good news is that you don't have to work as hard as a student that is doing it for the first time. Okay, so a lot of students think I've got to do everything again. Well, no, you don't. And I think it's about, working with that student, encouraging them to engage with their tuition provider as well. So there's lots of different plans. And the key thing is positivity. I'm a big fan of positivity, that if you've got the right mental attitude, then you're going to pass that exam. I have seen that for over 22 years where students have failed an exam once or twice. Okay, they have gone on to pass. You can do this, but you've got to really want it. You've got to really work at it.
Yeah, makes sense. I do think actually it's important to note the point that you said earlier about like failing isn't great, obviously, and you're going to be upset, you're going to be annoyed, but it's not the end of the road. And if you see it as an opportunity to learn from your experiences and to be better next time round, then that's going to give you the motivation, I would think, to pass it. And it might take you a while to get into that mindset, but once you're there, as long as you approach it properly, then you should pass that second time round.
Oh, totally. We've seen it time and time again. And I have nothing but respect for these students. I'd rather a student fail, okay, than get the qualification and be half good. I want them to be really good at their jobs. I want them to be bang on. Okay. And that's what CTA and ATT is about, is making sure that you uphold these amazing professions and reflect the standards that they're proud of.
Yeah, I'm fully with that. And if you have passed when you weren't really ready to pass, then you're probably almost going to make the rest of your career progression a bit more difficult because you're almost a bit behind the curve. So it's probably like a blessing in disguise almost.
And it's funny enough, you say that. That's a really good point, mate, is that so many students have then come back to me and said, Nick, you were right. And I once the students calm down, once we have a nice chat, I say, honestly, were you really ready technically? And they'll actually be honest. Most of them will be very honest and say,
yeah,
no, you're right. I wasn't ready, and I can now see, gosh, yeah, how much I had to still learn. And that's a really nice thing when that student gets that self-realization that actually, yeah, this wasn't the examiner's fault. This was me. I wasn't there. It's perfect. It's brilliant.
Yeah, you absolutely have got to be humble and self-reflect, honestly, haven't you, with this, really? Because if you're in denial, then you're just not going to help yourself for that next exam.
Exactly.
So let's say then that someone is trying to get ready then for resits. What do you think people should do in the first case to kind of get themselves in the right mindset for it? You've kind of talked about taking a week off and spending time with family, friends, etc. Have you got anything else that you suggest students do?
Yeah, I think if, again, I know we've covered this all before, but anyone listening to this podcast, I will always say to a student, okay, let's talk about the exam itself, right? Number one, you need to get a pen and paper and literally reflect on what went wrong. Yeah, what do you think went wrong? Was it timing? Was it misinterpreting the question? Was it not being ready? So we've got to find that out first of all, okay? And then step two will be, okay, so more often than not, Jack, is technical knowledge. Okay, the folder, they couldn't find things in their folder, or they didn't even have a folder. And I think the first thing is I will say to students, the first 4 weeks after you failed an exam, many students will say to me, I want to go straight into question practice. I ban question practice. Question practice is a no-no for the first 4 weeks after you failed an exam, because you're not in the right mindset. What I say to students is that you need to be technically 100%. You need to be very honest and say, okay, what are the technical areas that you do not understand? What was it that caused the block, caused the issue? Okay, and that's where, we've got revision summaries, as that we've encouraged students to prepare. We've got our sample ones that they can have for free, and all of that. Or there are memory joggers. There are so many, but student needs to have a game plan. Okay, I need to get myself technically on point. Once a student is technically on point, okay, the next phase, Jack, okay, is again, question practice is banned. What I tell students to do is don't practice questions. You're wasting your time. What you need to do is you need to read every question. Read every single question as if you're under exam conditions. This is for a retaker. okay, and learn to spot the issues, learn to spot the problems. That is, for most students, the common reason for failing, okay, because they misread, they misinterpret, and they can't locate it in their revision folder. So, so first 4 weeks is that so they're technically ready, folders getting ready, and then they're getting used to the exam spotting issues. And that's the main bit where they build confidence. Once they're, and the final stage for a retaker is to then really practice questions to time. Yeah, because they're doing this for the second time round, it's slightly different for them, using the Exam4 software, being comfortable, knowing the admin. And that has worked for me, for my students, for over 22 years. It's a really good plan. It's robust, it's bulletproof, and it works.
Or makes sense. It's interesting actually that you said to not do any question practice for 4 weeks. So it sounds like that technical knowledge is a common reason for not passing it then, but equally also then not being able to spot the problems. And you kind of have already touched upon this a little bit already. You kind of said it is a bit easier for students second time around because they've already got a certain amount of knowledge.
Yeah.
How should they go about, I suppose, knowing what chapters they should ignore and which ones that they should focus their time on so they can get the best bang for their buck?
Yeah, good question. Really good question. I think what it comes down to is, like, we've put together, as you know, content pages, for OMB, TOMC, OMB APS, okay? And there is one for individuals, I think. And what it is, the students got to go down the list of topics and actually say, right, I'm 100% comfortable with these. So they can just do gentle revision on those. Yeah, it's not any student, it's not going to take, we're always going to have our favorite topics where we don't really need much of a recap. And I think the student then needs to prioritize and focus on the bits they didn't understand. And for certain papers, there's always a common area, where for certain things students just do not get, and they've got to get the support. Yeah, they can either come to you and I. Yeah, as you know, we're going to be providing lots of free exam support, and so they can contact us, or they go to their tuition provider. Yeah, they go to their tuition provider and talk to their, or even at work. Okay, talk to friends and colleagues at work who've done this exam, and get some support there. But I think they really need to be open and honest. Actually, I didn't really understand this, so I think that's important. But the big thing is, Jack, and even if you're technically really good, you're still not going to pass. Yeah, this is the bit students don't get. You're still not going to pass unless you can spot the issue and scenario and problem in a question. And so that's why the second phase is critical. Yeah, the second phase is to get comfortable with how we're going to spot things. I'll give you an example, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
So in inheritance tax, it wasn't a CTA paper. It was a different qualification. But in inheritance tax, when we teach gift with reservation of benefit, okay, we always use the example of an individual having a residential property. They gift the property, but they still reside in the property. So every student knows it's textbook that is a gift with reservation. However, a question came up where it wasn't a property this time. It was actually shares in a company. So the father had gifted the shares in the company to the daughter, but he still retained the right to receive the dividends. Okay, so that was a gift with reservation, because the student that's just practiced past papers will never connect that's gift with reservation. Yeah, but the student that's learned the scenario, saying step one, there's a gift, fine. Step two, has there been a benefit retained? Then those students got the marks. And that's what we want students to do, is to be diagnostic, rather than simply memorize what's come up in a previous paper. And if you become more diagnostic, you're going to pass.
I think that is almost the perfect example to why just doing past papers is a mistake, because as you say, every student's going to know that one scenario where it's the house being gifted, but if they actually understood the underlying rule, then it would be very easy to transfer that to that new scenario that came up in the exam. It's like the perfect example as to why doing that's a bad idea.
Yes, and I've been saying it for years, Jack. Every talk course that I do for the last 22 years, I actually start with how you fail in an exam. Seriously, that's my USP. And many students actually get upset with me on the talk phase. Oh, you've been quite negative. I'm not. I'm protecting you. Yep. And I'm saying you need to trust us here. And for example, Jack, on taxation of major corporates, I was teaching property derivatives. Yeah. And and one of the students was struggling to understand it. And the student said to me, "Oh, don't worry, Nick. I'll practice questions and I'll be fine." And I actually got quite cross. I said, "You still don't get it." I go, "There is no other question. This has only been tested once since 2009. So you either understand it here now or you can't." And that's and that student actually failed the exam first time. That particular student actually failed because he was so hell-bent on just doing past papers. Okay. And like you said, when he came back and he failed, and he was a lot more humble, and he said, "Nick, you're right. I'm so sorry." And you get that a lot. You really get that a lot, where students think that they know best. But unfortunately, CTA tutors, we know how to get people through. And like I said, are you going to be humble and accept where you've gone wrong, or is it going to be a bit of a tussle to see that bright light of success?
I think this is going to sound a bit harsh me saying this, but I'm actually glad that you can't pass the ATT and CTA by just doing past papers, because I think that's actually a mistake in the exam system generally, because it doesn't demonstrate understanding, does it? It really doesn't.
No, Jack, and you know what? I totally agree. And I think, yeah, absolutely. And I've seen people, students fail. I had one person who failed the OMB application paper 3 times. Yeah. And then went on to pass and got partnership promotion. And it was fantastic. And he was like, "Nick, why am I not passing this?" And this guy was technically so good. I've had students who are technically amazing, but just can't pass the exam because they can't spot the issue, or they're overwriting.
Yeah.
So what I tend to find, Jack, is, and this is such an important point, is that a lot of students, when they fail, they feel like they've got a mountain to climb, but they actually don't. And when you break it down and understand where things go wrong, it's just little simple changes like don't overwrite, don't by students not overwriting, they actually have more time in the exam. And there's a lot of students realizing that, gosh, you're making it so simple. I didn't realize I only had to write this much. And just if you start applying to the scenario as soon as you get into that exam, oh my God, you're going to be absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Simple changes and you'll pass.
I can see how people who are technically excellent actually would overwrite, because they've almost got more in their head to talk about. But not necessarily always a good thing, particularly when you're time restricted.
No, and I do say to students, if you're writing more than or typing these days, if you're typing more than a sentence and a half, you're typing too much.
Do you suggest that students create a plan to go about re-preparing for an exam that they failed previously?
100%, and that's really coming back to you need a timetable without a doubt. And this is what, whether they come to you or I or go to the tuition provider, we've got to sit down with that person and say, right, these are the first 4 weeks. This is where you need to be. Realistically, you've got to adapt it to that person, what their family commitments like, what their work commitments like. So you do need to tailor it. It can't be a one glove fits all approach. So they need a timetable with realistic targets. Okay. And the time, small bite-sized chunks is the flavor of the month. That's the way to do it. And where a lot of students go wrong as well, Jack, I think, is with COVID, we're all working from home. We're all working longer hours than we used to, possibly. Okay. And I say to students, look, if you're working full on Monday to Friday, be realistic in what you can do. Do the stuff that you find easy, recap for half an hour, but you do have to dedicate time. You've got to dedicate a solid weekend, whether it's half a Saturday, half a Sunday. That's where I don't compromise. If you can't put the time in, then defer. It does require a time commitment, and that's another issue with some students. They feel that they can do this along. Some of them do have really busy lives, family, work, or whatever. So the time commitment is critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it is, isn't it? And I suppose if you do try and sit it. If you haven't got enough time, then you're going to end up putting in some time, which is ended up going to be wasted, really. So if you defer it and then do when you've got that proper time, enough time to do it, then you're not going to spend as much time studying overall then, which is probably going to be better for your overall life if you've got other things going on as well.
Well, I actually ask every student, I ask every student, are you married? Are you in a relationship? Do you have kids? And they find that amusing. Some of them start laughing, it's a bit personal. I go, no, it's not. I go, just trust me. Okay, because I've actually had, no joke, Jack, a few years ago, I actually had a student who got married the weekend before the exam. Seriously. And I remember this was pre-COVID, and she was really excited. Oh, it was a Friday. I remember this really. And I said, what are you doing? She said, I've got an exam. I'm getting married this weekend. I said, you serious? And it's interesting how many people do, believe it or not, between revision and the exam, get married or get engaged. And there's nothing wrong in that, but I kind of think, oh my God, this is, how can you, I couldn't cope with those two pressures. And also, especially where you've got and this is where we need to be mindful, where I've had some students who, their wives or partners have had children, a newborn, and I actually encourage them not to sit the exam. I say, look, you really need to, are you sure you want to do this? Because your family are going to need you. Okay, you're putting too much pressure. So I do feel as a tutor, my role has slightly, changed a lot over the years, but I'm more of a counselor, just Nit's experience in life, thinking, look, guys, these exams I appreciate are important, but family comes first. Your mental health comes first. To do these exams, you've got to be in the right frame of mind. And also the sad part of this job is you also, with COVID, and there are also illnesses and bereavements, and so students need that help and support as well. So, there are other factors that we need to also take into account. And so I think, anyone listening to this podcast, look, Jack's here, I'm here, we will help you. We will help you. And this isn't a race. If you need to take time out, take time out, and you'll come back stronger. And when you're ready to fight, you'll pass the exam.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the exact same for me, but when I moved house, I didn't sit an exam in that sitting because I just thought it was going to be too much. And actually, it was quite nice to have the break as well.
Yeah.
So I came back feeling much more refreshed for my next exam because I had a 6-month break. I'd moved into my new house. I didn't have to worry about that anymore, and it was great. Yeah. It was great.
Yeah. Agreed, Jack. Absolutely. And that's another one. I've had people move home in between exams and it hasn't gone well. And you did the smart thing, just take a break, concentrate on that it's a big project moving home, and so, yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes students panic. They want everything done quickly. I want to be CTA qualified by X amount. Well, it doesn't always work out.
Yeah. And I was one of those people, to be honest. So it was actually quite a tough decision for me to not sit in that one sitting. I did and ah about it, but in the end, I just thought it's for the better. So I do get it because I did want to pass as quickly as possible as well. And a six months feels like a long time when you're on the road to qualify. Like an extra 6 months does feel like a long time. But if you're going to risk failing it because you haven't got enough time to put in, then you just have another 6 months of studying almost.
But the other thing, Jack, just to add in there as well, I think family support is really important. That's why I talk about, are you in a relationship or not? I think I've had situations where a person has failed and the family gets frustrated because that person isn't devoting time to the family. And I do feel, and that's why I say to people, look, take a week out, have a chat with family. You can't have stresses and strains in your home and then you're trying to do this. And some people have deferred and said, just come back to me when you're ready. Just let me know when you're ready. And I think that's important, making sure you've got the support network around you, even at work as well. So, yeah, and you're not alone.
Absolutely. So some people who are resitting then will be sitting the next exam under different Finance Act rules. How should they prepare differently?
Because there's going to be... Right, not for November.
Oh yeah, not for November. No, yeah, you're absolutely right for November, but just generally speaking.
Yeah. So if you're going to be, with Finance Act changes, I think the best thing to do is to go to your tuition provider. Yeah, if you're self-studying, yeah, or you can even research it on Google, on the internet. Is just get the updates. Yeah, just get the updates. I know for a fact, for corporation tax, there will be quite a few changes on the capital allowances. And so, you will need to brush up. There'll be technical areas, and you can either get that technical knowledge through work, okay, and I would strongly recommend the minimum that students should be doing, where there's been a significant Finance Act change, is you do need to get hold of a revision question bank. Okay, that's important because it will reflect the changes in there. So you'll see how it's being tested. I think at the very least you should be doing that, because many students are reluctant to get new material. And Jack, and one thing I want to kind of put in there, that most tuition providers, BPP, Tolley's, Kaplan, we provide we will provide pass assurance. Yeah, if you meet certain criteria, you will get updated material. But if you're self-study and you haven't done that, okay, I would say at the very least get a new revision question bank.
Yeah. Well, absolutely makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you're studying from the old material, then you could just be answering a question completely wrong with outdated knowledge.
Yeah. The thing is, it's a tricky one. I would say for the last few Finance Act, Jack, the changes have been minimal. So we've been quite honest with students that you don't need to waste your money. Okay. Whereas I think in the last, certainly FA20 and FA21, for OMB and TOMC, there are some significant changes. And if the student's doing it at work, then they don't need it. They don't need it. But if they're not doing that kind of work in a day-to-day jobs, then I think they need additional resource.
Yeah. So it's easy for us to talk about anyway what students should do in order to prepare for Resit, but I think probably one of the hardest things for people is going to keep the enthusiasm and the motivation at times.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for students in relation to that?
I think this comes back down to the timetable, Jack, if I'm being honest. I think when a student fails and they've kind of given it a week and they've got a clear head to have a proper discussion, I do make it a point that you still need to have a life. You still need to do things that make you happy. And it's interesting over the years what makes people happy. I've had someone say horse riding, surfing, going to the pub, whatever it is, okay? That needs to be slotted into your lives where you're still doing all your other extracurricular activities, you're having fun. And I think the main thing is to have targets, weekly sensible targets, where the watch out list, okay, bringing that back in, is I think students need to listen to the other podcasts that you and I have prepared, if this is the first one they're listening to, where on how to prepare a revision folder, looking at the revision summaries that we have, and tailoring those or getting advice more on that from us, from you. And I think they need to basically make a list of where they've gone wrong. Yeah. So they're revising those. And that's where the confidence comes in, Jack. The minute they realize, gosh, they've made 20 errors a week on questions. That's brilliant. Even more the better. Okay. And so that's where they grow. Yeah. And what will happen, that student will suddenly realize, gosh, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that rule. I didn't realize that kicked in. And that's where the penny's dropping. Yeah. And from that negativity, you get a huge positive confidence boost. Yeah. The more things you get wrong during this taught phase, the better. And that's what we want students to do. It's small steps. Okay. Small steps will help you to pass. And I've seen it time and time again. But Jack, I do want to bring something in. I have had people, there are some people, Jack, and I hate to say this, and please forgive me for putting it on this podcast, they will never pass CTA. Yeah, there are some students, and I've had to actually say to some students, you need to quit now. Okay, and the only time I've had to say that to a student is where they continually misread questions. Does that make sense? They're missing. I have no control over how a student misinterprets, and when I've gone through that question for the 5th time with them, I have the very horrible task saying, look, I really think you need to find a different career, because this exam isn't for them, or what they do in their work, it will be limited. I can't see these people doing advisory work, or it could be that they can do advisory work, Jack, but they're not because it's not under time pressure. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And I think there are some students who just cannot process that information in the time. That you're not a failure as an individual. It's an exam, it's time pressure, but maybe at work, I've seen people do really well. They produce fantastic advice without the pressure. And so you do, I've seen that. About 10, 15 people in 22 years have kind of just said, actually, I can't do this.
Yeah. I think that's a good, I don't think it is a harsh thing to say though, really, because at the end of the day, if you feel like they're not going to be suitable for the career, if they end up sitting in a job like that for 30, 40 years and they're really struggling throughout the whole time, they're going to have a horrific career. They're going to be stressed. They're not going to enjoy it. Whereas I think being brave enough to acknowledge that it's not for you is actually a pretty big step, and a smart one as well, I would say.
It's interesting because, like, for example, the application planning skills paper, yeah, I've had very senior people fail it. And they'll come back to me and say, but Nick, I write reports for a living. Yeah, I write reports for a living. This is what I do day in, day out. Why am I not passing this exam? And I think sometimes, because like you said earlier, Jack, because these people know so much and they're really good at their jobs, okay, you can work in tax and not have the CTA qualification. You're still going to be fine. Okay. But people want CTA because it's a fantastic accolade to have. And these students that fail, they really struggle to give what the examiner wants, and they bring in other stuff that's not within the marking grid, the marking criteria. And so that's where sometimes the struggle can be as well. And it has been a battle with some students. I'm not going to lie. Some people have said, okay, Nick, I will just do what you want me to do. And that was that chap who then became partner. That was his problem. He was writing too much. But I'd put this in my advice. That's fine, but the examiner, you've just got to stick to what we're doing here. Whereas the others can't make the jump. They can't convert and give what the examiner wants. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
It is. I'm just going to very quickly come back to kind of doing those things that you enjoy throughout the period of studying.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, it's going to be a miserable 4-6 months, however long it is that you're studying for. And actually, when you have those breaks, you come back feeling much more refreshed. I never stuck to a particularly rigid timetable when I was studying. I would try and study like 3 evenings in the week and pretty much a whole day on the weekend. But if I came home from work one day and I was feeling absolutely frazzled, I just wouldn't study that night. I would do it on a different night, and I would do the thing that I enjoyed, which for me was actually gaming. Just did that for a few hours, got the energy back, and came back and tackled it the next day when I was feeling it more.
Yeah, I agree, Jack. I agree. Like with my own, my both my boys are, one's at uni, one's doing GCSEs right now, and I have what's called the red line. I say, look, like for example, for me personally, you don't study on a Friday evening. I know some people prefer to. For me, Friday evenings is always Friday, straight from school, college, whatever. It's always about enjoying the evening, So you've got to switch off. Saturday, again, really important. Some people prefer the evening study plan, or morning. I was always, by Saturday, 4 o'clock, I'm done. I've got the weekend to enjoy. And the Sunday's 3 o'clock. Unless it's close to the exam, then you might push it till 4, 5. But I had certain plots where I knew in my mind, I'm not doing that. I'm going to go and have fun, step away from this, from the room where I'm studying, and just get out. Yeah. And for me, and I always, for me, my 2 favorite things are walking and going for dinner. It could be a simple meal, it could be a pizza, but those 2 things really help me relax and just forget about work. Okay. Or even going to the cinema pre-COVID was fantastic. I used to go to cinema a lot. My parents used to get really worried. He's got exams, he's going to watch films. but my mum got it. My mum totally got it. My dad never did. But my mum got it, but I passed, and because when you're watching a film, you forget about everything, You're immersed. So yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. You've got to find your happy place. Yeah, whatever that is, do not stop, because it's the happy place that's going to help you pass. That positive mental attitude.
You just need the balance between the both, because if you spend all the time in one or the other, obviously you're not going to pass. So it's just getting the balance right, isn't it, between them?
Yeah, and also, Jack, the other thing, like my youngest is realizing, we all have a blip during the day. And I think some people feel guilty about not studying, and that's wrong. Like for me, my blip is between 1 and 4. Yeah, between 1 and 4, I'm the most ineffective person at that point, maybe because it's post lunch or whatever. So if that is your kind of weak point, do something, just relax. It's not a problem. Then get back on it. And the other thing that's important, Jack, is what I believe in is the way that you should be studying is on you can call it a traffic light system or a tiered system. So for me, I'm a morning person. So for me, I will do my most difficult work, the most complex bits in the morning, which is the red, because that's where I'm able to concentrate 100%. I'm on point. As the day progresses, I then do the kind of medium stuff that's manageable. And then the really easy, especially of an evening, I say to students, do the stuff that's green, that if that came up in the exam, you could do that straight away. And I think by doing that, that will also help you cope with getting the work done.
Yeah, agreed. You definitely got to know yourself. So just 2 more points then, Nitin, because we've gone through quite a few things today. What do you think is the most important point for students to actually take away from this? If they only took away 1 point, what would you want it to be?
I would say honesty. I'd say be honest. 2 things, Jack, if you don't mind. Sorry.
Breaking the rule.
Yeah, sorry. Be honest. Be really, really honest. Okay. Why you failed. Don't blame anyone. Don't blame yourself, but just be honest. What was it that led to it? Second thing, come back for the fight. Be positive. You can do this. And I'm saying, Jack's got a lot of experience here. I've been doing this for over 22 years. You will pass this exam, but you need to be in the right mind frame.
Excellent. Thank you. And then just the last one then. So this is where you could have captured that second point, Nitin, because this is the closing thoughts. Any other closing thoughts that you'd like to give to students then just before resitting? Maybe you've already covered them both then though.
I would say for this exam, you need really good revision summaries, without a doubt. Whatever resource you're using, okay, you need to have an effective resource that you can apply your knowledge. That is the key to passing this exam. Okay, and I think that's where I've seen in most retakers, they didn't do that the first time round. And so, yeah, and I think that's the key thing. And I think contact Jack, okay, on that. And again, he's got lots of resources to help you and guide you with.
Yeah, there's going to be links in the show notes to this episode, where you can basically download a step-by-step guide on how to create your own revision folder, revision summary, whatever you want to call it, but they're basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Nit.
Thanks, Jack.
The show notes of this episode will include a link to all the other episodes and resources to help you pass the ATT and CTA exams. These include episodes on how to pass the CTA Advanced Technical Papers, which is live on Monday the 26th of July, and also one on the Application and Professional Skills Papers, which is live on Monday the 2nd of August. Both of these episodes are more tailored towards the owner-managed business or O&B papers, but are still relevant and contain lots of useful information and advice, even if you're sitting a different one of those papers. There's also a step-by-step guide on how to create your very own revision folder or summary, along with example contents pages and summaries. The show notes are at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP30a. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP30a. And TTPP30a just stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast, episode 38. If you would like to talk to me or Nitin about anything exam related, including the revision summaries or folders, then please do not hesitate to get in contact with us. We'd be more than happy to help out. Our contact details will be in the show notes, but you can easily get in contact with both of us on LinkedIn. So my full name is Jack Bonehill, and Nitin's is Nitin Rabheru. But that's it for this episode. I hope you found the episode useful and have taken away some useful tips to help you progress, develop and improve your tax career. Until next time.